Hello, welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons, and with me as always is Juan. Today, I'm actually in Houston because we have a lot to talk about. Busy week coming up. We have two championship finals in professional sports to talk about, specifically the NBA, but we'll also touch on the NHL and the Stanley Cup Finals. We'll also talk about the MLB season and how seemingly the Rangers have kind of tailed off a bit, as well as the Astros. But let's start. So the NBA Finals is set. It's for the third year in a row. It's going to be Golden State versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. What are your thoughts about the previous two series?
I'm going to be totally honest. Didn't watch many of them after Isaiah Thomas and Kawhi Leonard went out. We talked about it last week. Overwhelming talent just beats good coach teams, and this is the case. Both the Spurs and the Celtics just seemingly couldn't get anything going throughout the series at all. I mean, we start in the East. Boston just no shot blocking at the rim. And if you watch just the highlights of those games, the Cavaliers were getting whatever they wanted around the basket, and Boston had nobody to stop them. And then them shooting three-pointers, when they're hitting 15 to 23s, they're hard to beat, and that's what they were doing in the series. And obviously not having your go-to scorer in Isaiah Thomas, the Celtics struggled to score for much of the series. They did get a good performance from Avery Bradley and Marcus Smart in their Game 3 win, but for the most part, it was all Cleveland. And in the West, but the Spurs weren't within 10 points in any of those games, especially after Kawhi Leonard went out. He's just so integral to both their offense and defense that when you don't have him, you need so much from LaMarcus Aldridge, Danny Green, Patty Mills, those players. And Golden State just blitzed the Spurs defense with the way they shot the ball. And I mean, they look extremely dangerous, obviously 12-0 going into the NBA Finals. So I think it's just the injuries hit at an inopportune time for both the NBA and those teams. And hopefully this finals kind of rescues what a playoffs has been kind of bad to watch, to be totally honest.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, it feels like the injury bug just conspired to take any sort of suspense out of both series. But even if injuries hadn't like really hit, like it would be debatable whether or not like it would still be as close as we would hope. I mean, obviously Isaiah Thomas went out. But even then, it seemed like they were at least able to play the Cavs a little bit closer. I mean, they were able to lock down a bit on defense, and obviously the big games from Marcus Smart and Avery Bradley really helped them pull out that win in Cleveland, which was very impressive. But at the end of the day, the result was never really in doubt. I mean, the Cavs, especially having LeBron, more than likely, like LeBron was going to go through. There's no way. And especially with the way with the way their 3-pointers are going in. Like, I mean, they have, I feel like four players shooting over 40% from three. I know Kevin Love and Kyrie are up there, and Channing Frye's up there technically as well. Braun, I think, is also up there. And it's just, it's just absolutely insane. Just like very much the Golden State Warriors. It's like if you can't stop them from shooting threes, and like it's almost close to impossible to do that, like you're going to have a very tough time defeating this team. And going back to the Golden State series with the Spurs, I mean, there's not really much to talk about with that from last week because there was only one game that was played, and it was by the Warriors. Before I go into sort of making an analogy about like how these playoffs sort of felt, I will say that like it's going to be very interesting to see what both Boston and the Spurs do going into the offseason, since they both have some interesting pieces that they could possibly pick up. And I have a few predictions to go through with those. But just a quick note on the NBA playoffs and just sort of like how one-sided and kind of boring it's been throughout. It kind of feels a bit like, and to rely on sort of my wrestling knowledge. So back in the 90s, there was a hit TV show, but it wasn't BoJack Horseman. It was WCW, World Championship Wrestling. It was the rival promotion to WWE. WWE was mostly like sort of like in the north, and so it was very much sort of like New York centered, while WCW was like headquartered in Atlanta. So you had sort of like that north-south rivalry, but it was also the big thing that WCW did, which got it a lot of success at first, was they would bring over all the hot, well-known acts from WWE. So they brought in like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, because they were willing to like pay those people like exorbitant amounts of money to come over. And the other big thing that they ended up doing was they formed all these like huge heel stables with like their best wrestlers. So you would have like NWO, which was the New World Order. And so they would just run roughshod over the rest of the company. And I mean, for a while it was very popular because like it was just like you watch these dominant people just like beat the crap out of all these like lesser known people. But after a while it just started getting boring because like everyone started like forming their own NWOs and just like sort of like it became hard to follow, and it just like again like all the suspense was taken out. And so it's beginning to feel like NBA is becoming a bit like WCW. And the reason that you don't hear about a WCW anymore is because it folded because it lost the Monday Night Wars to WWE. So, I mean, granted, like, there's no, like, real competition with the NBA in terms of, like, for, like, talent or anything like that. And, I mean, it's still, like, tops, but, like, like, they have to be careful and they really got to fix that salary cap problem if they are to, like, make it interesting to watch again. But, yeah, that's just my take. I guess we should preview the finals, since that's pretty much the entire gist of the playoffs. It better have good payoff because, like, I mean, we went through so much bad basketball in the playoffs.
Yeah, so the finals will start next Thursday, June the 1st. So they have a week off in between games. The Warriors actually will have, I think, 10 days off. So because the series was so short. But the two split the regular season series 1-1. And obviously it's a rematch of the last 2 years. The first year, the Golden State won in 6. Last year, of course, Cleveland came back from 3-1 down and won in 7. So for me, I'm going to go Golden State in 6. So I think based on what I've seen so far in these playoffs, these Warriors are just, I mean, not only offensively, but Greg Popovich called them the best defensive team in the league this year. And I think the metrics back them up. I think they're number 2 overall in defensive rating throughout the regular season. And the way Cleveland has played throughout these playoffs is they played the Golden State way. And I just don't think you can beat the Warriors that way, shooting that amount of 3-pointers, because you're trying to play their game and try to beat them at it. I don't think it's going to work out. So I think the way for Cleveland to win the series is similar to what they did last year, was they need to slow the game down. And obviously LeBron James is a matchup nightmare, and the way he's been playing these playoffs it's going to be hard for anybody to guard him, no matter how good a defensive team you are. But also, you're going to need Kyrie Irving, and if he plays like he did in the last 2 games of the Eastern Conference Finals series, I think Cleveland has a real puncher's chance here. Kevin Love has been shooting the ball great. It's just, I think they're going to struggle to stop the Warriors' offense because Cleveland hasn't really faced a good offensive team so far in these playoffs. You look at Indiana, they were a mediocre to bad offensive team throughout the regular season. Toronto had good metrics, but they just were completely overmatched, and Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan shot the ball horribly that series. And then against the Celtics, Boston was a average offensive team, and especially when they lose their leading scorer, Isaiah Thomas, that really hurt them. So defensively, I think they're going to have problems stopping all the Warriors shooters, and Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green's been shooting the ball great. Kevin Durant, obviously, in his first finals appearance since 2012. So just my initial thoughts are that I think that the Cavaliers defensively are going to have issues, and that's going to lead to their downfall.
Those are some very interesting points. I mean, and definitely going back to Golden State being one of the best defensive teams in the league. I mean, like 100% has to go to the effort of Draymond Green, who I personally, again, picked to be the best defensive player of the year. That being said, I think they're, again, I think we've touched on this before, but while this was a very good defensive team, there are some weaknesses to the Golden State Warriors. I mean, obviously down in the post, again, that's something we talked about. I mean, and granted, I know that the league is going further out, and that's kind of the strengths of both teams. But I will say, in that matchup, I would say Tristan Thompson is better than Zaza. And I if Tristan can find his form from like the last 2 playoffs in terms of at least like defense and rebounding, they definitely have a bit more than a puncher's chance, even if Kyrie doesn't necessarily hit all his shots. And it's just mostly sort of just relying on the 3-point shooting of LeBron and Kevin Love, Kyle Korver. But that also being said, I also feel that this Cavs team might have a bit more depth than the one from the past 2 years. I think Deron Williams is a upgrade over Matthew Dellavedova. So it's going to be interesting to see how the benches sort of factor into this. I mean, granted, it's the finals, and so most of the time, like that's why you save up your starters throughout most of pretty much the entirety of the regular season, as well as most of the beginning of the playoffs. is that you just want your starters to be like playing as much as possible, throwing them out there and letting them just give it their all, because there's no games after this. But having a good bench, as shown by the 2011 Mavs against the Heat, if you have a good bench, that really helps alleviate some of that pressure and can help spell and keep starters fresh, so that like when it's like in the fourth quarter and when you really need them to perform, they'll be at their best and they won't have fatigue to deal with, as well as obviously the other team. So it'll be interesting to see what goes down. I personally am taking the Cavs in this one. I mean, again, personally, I feel like LeBron is still the best player on either team, and he's arguably the best player in the league. I'm impressed with both Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. Obviously, they're both great, and they're hitting their shots, and they're giving good defense as well. But I think someone you have to really watch out for in terms of like someone who might be a bit disappointing is Klay Thompson. I mean, granted, the reason his numbers are kind of down is obviously because Kevin Durant coming in and sort of like taking shots. But like even then, he seems to be like kind of the odd man out right now, which is sort of surprising. But when you look at it, it's not necessarily too surprising when you consider like Steph Curry has always been like the primary ball handler, and then you have Draymond Green, who's like both your defensive person, but also like he gets rebounds, he helps assist, then he like spots up, gets you points, and then Kevin Durant, one of the greatest scorers in the league and of his generation. And so then that sort of just leaves you with Klay Thompson, who's, I wouldn't say he's terrible at like dribbling or handling the ball. He's best used, I feel, as a spot up shooter. And when you have someone like Kevin Durant that you can just pass it to, like, I mean, obviously you're going to lose that. And so I don't know if he's going to be at his best focused right now. And so that's going to be an interesting case to see going forward. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be shocked if the Warriors win. I mean, this really can go either way. But I think this goes to 7, and I think Cleveland wins again.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think your point on Klay Thompson is very apt. I think he's been struggling shooting the ball. He's only 38% from the field and 36% from 3 in the playoffs. So, I mean, if he continues to struggle, that's going to be advantage Cleveland, because they're going to have to depend more on Kevin Durant and Steph Curry to provide the amount of scoring that they have been providing. And if Cleveland can hold one of them down and Thompson continues to struggle shooting, that's a big advantage for them defensively. But you want to talk briefly about the Spurs and the Celtics, their offseason outlook?
I want to start with San Antonio Spurs. So with the Spurs, they might not have the most amount of cap space, but what's going to be interesting to see is that I think they have just enough cap space to bring in someone like Chris Paul if they wanted to, and if he wanted to come in at kind of a reduced rate just to chase a ring. I mean, I think that would be an amazing get if they could. I mean, granted, the big thing that's going to be interesting to see is if Manu Ginobili comes back at a reduced rate. I think he does. Like you saw what Tim Duncan did when it was his final contract. He took like a very cheap contract just to come back and play with the team that he's played for his entire life. I think Manu Ginobili does that. Tony Parker is going to be interesting just because we don't know whether or not he's going to come back next year. I mean, there's a very real possibility that that the Rockets series was the last game he ever played. But I mean, even if he does come back, like, yeah, you're probably going to be paying two point guards close to like 25 to 30 million next year. But I mean, like, having a tandem of Chris Paul and Tony Parker should be pretty good. Now, the big thing that I want to say though is that I think there's a possibility that my other big prediction, I think they get Chris Paul. I think they're able to re-sign Jonathan Simmons. I think they probably cut David Lee. They let Patty Mills walk, but I think they can bring in Chris Paul and keep Jonathan Simmons. But I think the other big thing to watch out for is that I think they might trade up in the draft this year and get Jarrett Allen. And just because like that seems like the most Spursy thing to do ever. And I mean, like, yeah, I know people keep saying like, oh, Jarrett Allen has like a similar game to Tim Duncan, but I mean, like, when you watch his game, like they kind of are. And not only that, but they need to also find their next kind of like 5. And like Jarrett Allen kind of, to me, comes across as someone that fits with like the Spurs plan. But I think it looks like you disagree. What do you say?
Well, I just think with the amount of money that's being thrown around, I think Jonathan Simmons is going to get easily a $12 million, $15 million contract. I mean, we had players like Alan Crabb got $18 million a year, I think. And he's an off the bench player for the Portland Trailblazers. So, I mean, what we saw from Simmons in the playoffs was a guy that has a much improved jump shot and can basically get to the rim whenever he wants, can finish with a variety of different floaters. Also defensively, he played well against James Harden one-on-one down the stretch of games. So I think he's going to get paid 12 to 15 million. And so right now they have probably around 15 or so million in cap room. If Ginobili doesn't come back and you get rid of Parker, then that frees up a little bit of money, but I still think it's going to be tough to get Paul in there unless you move a guy like a Danny Green or some other contracts, because right now you have $39 million tied up between LaMarcus and Kawhi, and then Pau Gasol has a player option, which I would think he would exercise. I think he likes it in San Antonio, and I don't think that there's really that big a market for him. I mean, he had an okay year, but I don't really see a 36-year-old center getting more on the open market, and so it's going to be interesting. I mean, I don't doubt R.C. Buford and what the Spurs do, because they always seem to put together a great team, so it'll be interesting. Obviously, I think they need upgrades in the backcourt. It's just pretty old, and if they can get somebody in the draft or via free agency, Kawhi's, I mean, he's just reaching his prime. He's not even there yet, and so I think LaMarcus, that's going to be an issue because he's signed through 2019 and he has that player option, and given his play, just a lot of money tied up to him, and so I don't know. We'll see what the Spurs do. As far as the Celtics, I think they have a lot of options. So I think there's a quote yesterday from Isaiah Thomas that he said, "Let's get another superstar. Let's worry about my extension later." And so obviously there's going to be a decision with him after 2018 because they're expected to take Markelle Fultz number one, and that's supposedly a great point guard, future all-star, and they already have one in Isaiah Thomas. And so whether or not those two can play together, they could explore that this year. They could also make a variety of trades. They have a lot of depth on that team. It's so hard to win in this league when you don't have multiple superstars. And I mean, one could argue they don't even have one right now. Isaiah Thomas is a great player, but not superstar level. And so obviously there's guys on the trade market, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, and they could go a variety of different directions. But I think Danny Ainge has big decisions to make because, I mean, LeBron is going to wear down at some point, and there's not really any other team in the East that's better positioned than Boston, given the amount of depth and role players that they have and the amount of draft picks that they have.
I agree to some extent, although I will say that arguably Milwaukee might be a bit better positioned because they already have that superstar and arguably someone else who can fill in on that role as well. And then you have the potential of the rest of their players. But going back to Boston, I still say Isaiah Thomas is a star in this league. He's a superstar. I mean, a lot of people have questions on whether or not he can be the best player on a championship team, but I mean, like, the guy was, if he wasn't the leading scorer in the league during the regular season, I think he was like top 3, right? Top 3, top 5, almost 30 points a game. I mean, like, you can't say that's a fluke, you know, like that's definitely it. I mean, granted, like, he's undersized and that really hurts his defensive ability. And in fact, he's a liability on defense. And so that definitely takes away from his value. But I'm like, I mean, the biggest problem right now is the Al Horford contract, which you just pointed out right now. I mean, like, and like we talked about during the series, like, I mean, like, they weren't able to get a lot of rim protection. And I mean, like, they're paying him close to $30 million a year to be like their 5, borderline 4. And it's just, I mean, it's not, he's right now, he's not giving you all that value. And like, granted, like, you still have all these draft picks, but like, and you still have a lot of cap room too. So that's not going to kill you. But I mean, like, the problem is that going into next year, you're going to have 2 huge role players. I mean, not 2 huge, like 2 big players, like obviously Isaiah Thomas, but also Avery Bradley, former UT player. Those 2 players are going to come off the books and you're only paying them like $14 million combined for, like, obviously this year, but also next year. And both are going to want to be paid big time. And I mean, like, I love Avery Bradley, but he's more of a 3-and-D. Obviously I don't think he's going to be like, I don't think he's going to reach the production levels of Klay Thompson, but I mean, like, Avery Bradley is still real good. And then obviously Isaiah Thomas, like, he's going to get the max, no question to me. Another person that comes up is going to be Marcus Smart, but I mean, like, they can still go over the cap to sign him, but the big problem is that, like, I mean, like, he's never really lived up to his potential. Like, you'd see flashes, like, even especially going back to obviously Game 3, which we talked about. Like, he put up 27 points in a must-win game, but then he would go on for the rest of the series, and I don't even remember him scoring more than double digits any other game. So the big thing going forward is just going to be like trying to not sacrifice the present in order to sustain for the future. I mean, again, like, they're still really well built. I mean, Jaylen Brown, third overall, he showed some potential, but he's still 20? Yeah, he's still 20. He's still got time. He's a youngin'. He's younger than me. I still think he's got potential. And I mean, like, people that were following the team this entire year said, like, Jaylen Brown got better and better as the season went on. But it's going to be real interesting to see what they do with what they do with the draft picks. I still think they keep it and go with Markelle Fultz, just so that they give themselves options, and like they can probably switch off both at like the 2. I mean, I think Isaiah Thomas is probably better suited to be at the 1 at this point, just again because like his defensive upside is so low, and it's going to be even more noticeable if they switch him to the 2. Versus Markelle Fultz, who has the size to play at the 2. It's just more like putting in defensive effort on his end. But I think part of that is just like he was just like, I mean, going back to his play in Washington, he was like pretty much the guy. And so it was just like, while you don't really want to like say like, oh, it was hard for him to get motivated. Like, I mean, like, if he can't get motivated on a Boston team that's like arguably already in contention right now, it's going to be in contention for a very long time. If he can't get motivated, then like he shouldn't be the first overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, the volatility in draft picks, you can have as many draft picks as you want, but as you said, these guys are so young when they come to the league, and like, you look at Marcus Smart, it's just flashes in the pan, but to get a consistent superstar, I think you need to go for that. If there's one available, Danny Ainge needs to make that trade, because just so integral to just in the way that the game is called, getting foul calls from referees. And experience. Yeah, it's just integral. And so any of those players, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, they're really nice pieces. But I think if there's a superstar to get, those guys need to be on the block and they need to be moved.
I want to add one more thing too. Definitely, I agree with all that, but I will say this, like, I mean, like, if they do trade him for someone like Jimmy Butler, who's only got like, let me say this though, I mean, like, even still, like, Jimmy Butler, like, he's got $20 million on his contract, and he's probably going to get more once that contract is up. He's already 27. At least with this draft, I mean, Markelle Fultz, like, yeah, there's a lot of questions about his play, but Markelle Fultz is still very good. Paul George really has only like 1 year left on that, and then he's just going to get paid. Going back, I think probably the best play is just Markelle Fultz, since Markelle Fultz is he's the most likely person in this draft, aside from maybe like Lonzo Ball and arguably someone like Josh Jackson, or even like Dennis Smith might be up there, but like don't tell any team that's not the Mavs of becoming a superstar. But that's all I have to say.
All right, let's move on to baseball. So the Texas Rangers, more Jekyll and Hyde from them. So they won the series over the weekend against the Detroit Tigers, including winning on Sunday Night Baseball. And they pulled within 5.5 of the AL West. But then they went to Boston, and bad things went on there.
Very bad things. So usually our baseball person's Evan Tannenbaum, and he asked me like, hey, don't, that game that like Sam Dyson completely blew, like, don't talk about it in a bad way about Sam Dyson. And I promised him I wouldn't. But screw it. Like, screw Sam Dyson. He should be DFA'd right now, man. Just to go back a bit. So, I mean, the Detroit game, Sam Dyson was actually very good. I believe he had 3 strikeouts in that game. And he was, like, hitting his spots. And the only bad pitch he had was a hit for a double by Miggy Cabrera. But, I mean, it's Miggy Cabrera, But yeah, so and when you look at his appearance against Boston, when he technically gave up like a 7-run inning, it really wasn't his. I know this is going to sound strange, but it wasn't really his fault. Like, when you look through even like the highlights, you see like on plays that like runs were scored, just the bad defense that was happening, especially at the hot corner with Joey Gallo, who's, I mean, like, love the power. I mean, the power is there. I mean, it's obviously MLB ready for that. And he's still getting on base. He has a plus .800 OPS right now. And I mean, like, for someone that's hitting below the Mendoza line, that's absurd. And even his on base percentage is like right now .300. So he's still even getting on base too. So he's actually above average, I'd say, on offense, although like very close to average right now. Again, he's also very young, but I mean, his defense is not very good. I mean, I mean, like, obviously there's going to be a drop off between him and Adrian Beltre, who, I mean, Beltre is considered like the best defensive third baseman of his generation. But I mean, like, there's a very noticeable one, because at the end of the day, like, Joey Gallo, I feel, is definitely, like, his ceiling in terms of defense is somewhat limited. I don't necessarily know why I think that. I mean, I know a lot of scouts have been saying that, but I might just be like his reaction time in the field is not as great. But I mean, even then, like, it's not because he's slow or anything. I mean, he's a good base runner, but he's not like super fast. And I think that's sort of the gist of it, is just that he's still kind of raw at defense. Going through the minors too, like, he wasn't always like specifically at third base. He would sometimes go to left field. He sometimes say first, mostly just so that they could get him some reps there. Just because, like, obviously once he made the majors, like, they would have like Adrian Beltre right there, and so that if they wanted to get his bat in, they wanted to at least make sure that he had experience at all these other defensive positions. But because of that, that took away time from him to develop defensively at third base. And so because of that, and also, like, the outfield defense isn't exactly great right now. I mean, Mazzara, he's okay at the corner, but, like, he's not necessarily the fastest guy. I mean, I saw him get, like, thrown out trying to score on a double when he was at, like, I believe, starting from first base. He's not the fastest guy, so he can't exactly cover a lot of ground. I mean, the center field, right now, Carlos Gomez, who was their starter, he's out, and so they're trying to, like, they're switching between DeShields and Hoying, and I mean, DeShields is not a good center fielder. He's terrible at taking routes. I mean, he's one of the fastest people in the league, but he just, like, I mean, that's how bad he is at taking routes, is that even with that, he's not that great defensively there. They put in Hoying last night, and he's good, but I mean, like, his bat is still, like, kind of lacking a bit. Although he was able to, I believe, get 2 RBI. No hits, 2 RBI. But even still, it's just like, right now, there's not a lot of great defense behind Sam Dyson. And the reason that matters is because Sam Dyson is a ground ball pitcher. And that was the reason why he was having so much success once he arrived to the Rangers, was because, like, you had, like, those people at the corners, and those people at the corners, like, you had obviously, like, Mitch Moreland, who's one of the best defensive first basemen in the league right now, and has been for some time. And you have Adrian Beltre, obviously, what we said, one of the best third basemen of his generation. And also you had Elvis Andrus, and Rugi's been kind of lackluster defensively, also kind of at bat. But once Adrian Beltre went down, and once Elvis's defense has kind of slid a bit, and obviously once you miss, like, Mitch Moreland, like, those ground balls are going out into the outfield, and it's just people are getting hits. And so what I think needs to happen with Sam Dyson is that they have to wait off on putting him in until Adrian Beltre comes back. And even when they do, like, right now, they should at least try easing him in, and, like, only really using him when either, like, they're down a lot. I mean, last night they had Jeremy Jeffress go 2 innings in a game that they were down a decent amount, although they were able to make a quick comeback in the 9th with a 3-run homer from Rugi Odor. But I mean, Jeremy Jeffress didn't give up any runs through two and a third innings. That's how they should really be using Sam Dyson at this point, which, I mean, is kind of unfortunate, but I mean, you at least have people like Alex Claudio, Matt Bush, Keone Kela. Like, you have at least some decent relievers right now who are already on the roster, is what I'm trying to say. So just rely on those people, and then just hope that Adrian Beltre comes back soon and his defense is as good as it was before, and then you can probably go get by with that. But yeah, like, really, this team, just overall, the bats have woken up a bit, but, like, it seems like just as the bats are getting back up, the starting pitching might be dipping a little bit. Martin Perez, like, I mean, like, in that game that Sam Dyson technically had a blown save in, I mean, Martin Perez arguably was out pitching Chris Sale, which was amazing to see. And then, like, Yu Darvish, obviously, he struggled through that Detroit game on Sunday, but he was able to pull out the win there. But, like, you have AJ Griffin, who he only pitched one in the 3rd inning, I believe, and then had to leave because of strain, and now he's going to be on the DL. And then Nick Martinez is Nick Martinez. I mean, you know, he's a decent, like, spot starter, you know, but looks like you're going to be relying on him for a while now. But hopefully they can get a game against Toronto in this series, just at least something, you know. Then they have Tampa Bay, which, I mean, they're there, and then they could turn around against Houston, and they have to really start. I mean, they better hope that they get hot against Houston, or else, like, they really got to start considering selling off some of these players. you're still in the hunt for the wild card, but like the Astros are very steadily pulling away the AL West. So, I mean, turn it around soon. At least Tyson Ross looks to be coming back soon. He had a good rehab start on Tuesday in Round Rock, but we'll see. How are the Astros doing?
Still the best team in the majors. All they do is win when they don't play the Cleveland Indians. So they got swept by Cleveland last weekend. They lost the season series to them 5-1. And so that's just going to be an issue if they play in the playoffs to beat the Cleveland Indians, because their pitchers, despite their struggles this year, they completely shut down the Astros lineup throughout that series. And then the back end of that rotation really had rough starts during that weekend. But the good news was although they did have some players in the DL, Dallas Keuchel and Brian McCann are both going to be activated today in their game against the Baltimore Orioles. And so they lucked out with the injuries there, that they weren't too serious. But then they played the Detroit Tigers and they won 3 out of 4. The catching position has been really amazing to watch offensively for the team. So obviously we know Brian McCann was the big acquisition in the offseason, and he's been great for them. Evan Gattis has also picked up his offense as the backup catcher and also occasional DH. And he's had his best season as an Astro so far this year. But also Juan Centeno, who they call up from AAA to back up catch for the 7 days while McCann was on the DL. He hit 2 home runs in his 2 starts. And so, I mean, we've gone through years and years of Jason Castro struggling. Before that, even the World Series team with Brad Ausmus struggling.
In all fairness, though, Jason Castro was an all-star one year.
One time, yes.
Yeah, but then he just fell off after that.
Yeah. So it's just from the catching position to get this type of production is amazing. Brad Peacock, again, unsung hero. He had a combined 1 hitter with him making the spot start for Dallas Keuchel. Him, Chris Devenski, Will Harrison, Ken Giles. They were great in the Game 1 win. Joe Musgrove had his best start of the season last night in their 2-0 win against the Orioles. So he has been extremely inconsistent, but there's definitely promise in that arm. And so, again, I'd say Astros probably will look to add an arm somewhere around the trade deadline, leaving Joe Musgrove in the rotation. And whatever you get from Colin McHugh, they would like an ace, but I don't think it's completely necessary if you get that type of production from Joe Musgrove. Mike Fiers is a different issue. We'll leave Mike Fiers alone for this week. And you mentioned Sam Dyson just pitching in kind of mop-up duty. If Luke Gregerson comes in a 1-run game anymore, he needs to just be in mop-up duty at this point, because I don't know what's happened to him, but it's not good every time he goes out there.
Sam Dyson happened to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sucking. Ha 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 Dyson.
Offensively, I think Carlos Correa continues to be on fire. He's hitting close to 300 now, which after his putrid start, that's shows you the tear that he's been on. And also Marwin Gonzalez continues to hit home runs, which is, still cannot really...
This is a fluke season, I will say. Yeah.
No
offense, Marwin. If you're listening to this, no offense, man. But, like, Carlos Correa always had the talent level to, like, get out of that slump. Marwin, like, you weird man. You weird man. You ruined so many things. Give us back that Yu Darvish perfect game.
Yeah. I mean, he's been, again, just crazy good for them. And I think one question I have is George Springer continues to kind of scuffle with his batting average at the top of that lineup. So he's hitting around 230, 240. And so it's going to be interesting to see how long AJ Hinch sticks with him at that leadoff spot. So at the beginning of last year, they had Jose Altuve leading off and Springer in the 3 or 4 hole. And they flipped them midway through the year. And Springer really, his batting average and his home run totals went up from the leadoff spot. And so, I mean, the team is winning right now. They had the best record in the major. So I doubt AJ Hinch does too much tinkering with that. But I mean, you have a guy that has an on base of around 313 at the top lineup. And I think things that you could look at down the road are maybe move Josh Reddick up there. If Alex Bregman continues to hit as well as he has, maybe move him up to the 2-hole, Reddick lead off, and move Springer down the lineup. But just the offensive struggles the team has seen, I think, just start from the top of the lineup sometimes when Springer just doesn't really get on base as much. And obviously he has the power, and I think he leads the league in leadoff home runs, but that's something that they're going to have to look at maybe further in the season. But upcoming week, they finish the series against the Baltimore Orioles, and then they go on the road for a big series against the first place Minnesota Twins, and then, of course, the Lone Star Series with the Texas Rangers. Yeah, so let's talk briefly about the NFL. And OTAs this week happened for both the Texans and the Cowboys. Any notes from Dallas camp?
So, some quick notes. Well, first the big news this week. David Irving potentially faces a 4-game suspension due to getting tagged with PED use. I want to read this comment. It's just too funny. Evan Tenenbaum writes, Jesus Christ, can we have one guy on defense that stays clean, doesn't go do PEDs, and is a good player? Well, in response to that, in all fairness to David Irving, the reason he got popped for PEDs is because some company that was sponsoring him gave him a supplement that had a banned substance in it. And apparently a big reason for that was because of David Irving's now ex-agent who did not read into that. Now, granted, at the end of the day, David Irving has to take responsibility for it. I mean, I still think David Irving is going to be set for a good year, even if he's like suspended for the first 4 games. But it's just, again, it's very disappointing. At least with, I mean, and not to take away from David Irving, because I still think he's a very, very good player, and I think he's very integral to this Dallas team. At least with going into this year, it's not going to be as bad as last year's, where both DeMarcus Lawrence and like Randy Gregory got popped, because we actually have some depth on the defensive line, especially with Taco Charlton, who has kind of the same measurables as David Irving, and so at least from what we've been able to hear so far, Taco Charlton's been doing very well, and it looks like Tyrone Smith has taken an interest into his development and kind of paying it back in the same way that DeMarcus Ware helped to train Tyrone Smith. Another big name, a few big notes. Zeke got into a small little car wreck this week, so they're just holding him out just to be safe. Because again, he's the star running back, and I mean, he's going to take enough physical pounding during the season. They don't need to put even more in a car. But another one, Jalen Smith, he's actually been able to go on the field and play a little bit. Obviously, not non-contact. It looks like he's going to probably be ready for the season in terms of like, can they throw him out there and his leg will still be attached to him by the end of the game. But probably going to ease him into the game, just because, again, he still hasn't played an NFL game yet, so it's going to take a bit. But I think the biggest takeaway right now is that Ryan Switzer, their 4th round pick, has been really impressive from what I've heard. He's actually developed a rapport with Dak Prescott already, in place for an injured Cole Beasley right now. He's made 2 great plays, according to reports, that really impressed a lot of people on the team, including Dak. And so he's a name to look out for as practice keeps going forward, and as we get ready for the NFL season. Ryan Switzer might be someone that works his way into the lineup, and look out for him. I would say look out for him. I mean, they still have Cole Beasley in the slot, but I mean, like, Ryan Switzer, like I felt was probably going to be in to be like a Lucky Whitehead replacement, and looks like he's almost pretty much entirely replaced him already. No offense, Lucky. But what's your take on the Texans?
Yeah, so the biggest note from OTAs this past week was left tackle Dwayne Brown was not participating, so he's in a contract dispute. He has 2 years left on his deal, non-guaranteed years, $9 million basically the next 2 years, and so they're going to try to get him a raise, I guess, or a long-term extension. At this point, I don't really see his leverage here, and he's 31 years old. He's missed a lot of time the last couple of years. He is still a great left tackle in this league, but I don't know how much leverage he has in this situation. Granted, the Texans' offensive line really needs him because
that's the leverage.
They've been really poor other than him for the last couple of years, so he could benefit from that. But the Texans took a tackle in this draft, and a lot of people plugging him in as the Dwayne Brown replacement down the line. And so we'll see how that plays out. Other notes from the offensive line, Nick Martin, he was their 2nd round pick last year, was penciled in as their starting center. He got injured before the year, didn't even play. He's returned to the field, and reports are he looks good out there. I mean, everybody looks good at this time of the year. Also, David Quesenberry, he is a tackle that they drafted in the later rounds a couple of years ago out of San Jose State. He's been out for 2 years fighting cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so just him fighting through that, and right now is in remission, so he's back on the field with the team. I think he has an outside shot of making the roster potentially as a backup tackle type, but just him being on the football field after his fight with cancer, I think amazing, and props to him. Also, Wes Welker was signed as a assistant coach for the receivers this past year, so that's the Bill Belichick, Bill O'Brien connection, and so
Texas connection as well.
Yeah, Texas Tech. So DeAndre Hopkins ready to learn from him, and so we'll see what Wes Welker does with that receiving crew that was at times last year a little bit underwhelming. Obviously, you have Will Fuller going to be in his second year. Hopefully, he works on those hands, doesn't have drops in the playoffs like last year. But no injury notes from the team. J.J. Watt is back. He says he's ready to go. So
J.J. Watt, you know. I feel like they probably brought in Wes Welker though for like what you just said about Will Fuller. Like, definitely. Like, Hopkins, like, yeah, he had a bit of a down year last year, but Will Fuller definitely did struggle last year, and like he's someone that they potentially would want to be. They want him. They all obviously drafted him in the first round with the intent for him to be the number 2 wide receiver, and like Wes Welker is one of the best wide receivers, you know, within like the late 2000s, early 2010s. And one of the best things that he was able to do was his hands. So, if he can at least like teach some of that to Will Fuller, that'd be amazing. Before we go into shoutouts, with the Stanley Cup Finals, it's been set. It's going to be between the Nashville Predators and the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Pittsburgh Penguins are the defending Stanley Cup champions. So right now they're the heavily favored team in this. They have the best player of his generation in Sidney Crosby, and arguably the second best player of his generation, Evgeny Malkin, as their top 2 centers. And then they have arguably one of the best wingers of his generation in Phil Kessel. Now, the big problem with those guys is just, in so much that they have a problem, is that they're kind of old, but they're still one of the best players in the league. So some of the best players in the league. So it's kind of, they've also gotten great play from their goalies. Obviously Marc-Andre Fleury, he's been able to do well, but their main starter is Matt Murray, who's young, and he was a big reason why they won it last year. If there's going to be one thing that holds this team back, it might be the defensive depth with their defensemen. Specifically, they have Chris Letang, but obviously he's had some injury issues. Beyond him, they have Olli Mata, but he's had his injury issues as well. And then you have like Trevor Daley, but he's a former Dallas Star, and we all became accustomed to his defensive lapses. He's a great offensive defenseman, but he's just, defensively he's not the best. But I think the interesting story going into this is Nashville, and with them, like, one of the big indicators for what team might win is this advanced stat in the NHL called Corsi. And so with Corsi, it's basically a measurement of like how, whenever a team is on the ice, how many shots on goal do they have versus how many shots on goal do they give up. And so basically it's a measurement of like how often they control the puck. And Nashville, throughout the playoff run, each team they've faced, they've had a higher Corsi percentage than the other team. And that usually is a pretty good predictor of what team's going to win. And in this case, it's no different. Nashville has the higher Corsi than Pittsburgh. And a lot of that is due to the fact that their defensive core is one of the best in the league. They traded one of the best defensemen of their generation in Shea Weber. They traded him for another one in PK Subban, which at first some people felt was a very lateral move. But, PK Subban has been so good. You also have Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Ekholm. I feel like I'm forgetting someone else. They have so many they've generated defensemen year after year after year. But then on top of that, they have a great first line in Ryan Johansson, James Neal, and Philip Forsberg. And so those guys have been helpful with like the scoring. And then you have some decent role players after that. They don't have the depth that Pittsburgh has, but I feel like Nashville probably takes this one. They also have been getting a great production from Pekka Rinne, their goalie. And so I take Nashville in 7.
So let's move on to shoutouts. So my first is MLS. So the Texas Derby, the rivalry between the Houston Dynamo and FC Dallas for first round is this Sunday night in Frisco. Sunday Night Football, 7 p.m. on FS1. So the Dynamo still are winless on the road, so they're 0-5, and they did not look close last week. They lost to Philadelphia 2-0, and then they lost to Atlanta 4-1. FC Dallas was undefeated until this past week, and then they lost last week to San Jose and at Chicago. So 2 teams coming off losses, but I think it's going to be interesting to see whether the Dynamo can use this kind of rivalry match to springboard them to success, because they've looked horrible on the road this year, and so this is a big test for them against a Dallas team that's basically been one of the best in MLS the last couple of years. Other shout out also Lance McCullers, so Astros pitcher. He was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated this week. His hand was, at least. It was a piece from Tom Berducci on the curveball and its importance in the majors right now. And so Lance McCullers is one of the best curveballs in the league. And shout out to him. Also to Bob Watson, who is an Astros legend who played in the 60s and 70s, obviously before our time, but he received a Lifetime Achievement Award this past week, and the Commissioner of Baseball, Rob Manfred, was there, and so shout out to him. And then finally, shout out to Brock Osweiler, who met the media for the first time in Cleveland this past week, and they asked him about his time in Houston. He declined to talk about it, just said he was excited to be Cleveland Brown, which I'm sure he is. The reporter actually asked him, do you think you're an NFL starter quality quarterback? And he said, quote, the proof is in the film. And so I don't know what Brock Osweiler YouTube highlights he's been watching on loop, but as a Texans fan who watched every game last year, there's not very much proof there. Shout out to him.
So shout out to Andrew Jones. I felt that was probably very, very likely he was going to return, but he officially announced that he will be returning to Texas. I mean, he was someone that definitely was improving and had very much improved by the end of the year. And having him next to Matt Coleman, and obviously with Bamba committing and having him, hopefully we can get something out of Curran Roach and Eric Davis. And then obviously adding in Ostakowski, the transfer. It's going to be a very interesting lineup next year. I mean, we said that about the team this past year, and we saw how that turned out. But I mean, that also being said, they didn't have really a great point guard set up for this past year, and they finally got one. So hopefully this UT basketball team can surprise a lot of people. Another shout out, Evan Tenenbaum is going to the Colonial, not as a player, but as a spectator. He's going to the Dean and DeLuca Invitational at the Colonial specifically. So good luck to him watching. Also shout out to Jinder Mahal. He's a WWE wrestler. He is the first person of Indian descent, like India, of Indian descent to win the WWE championship. And so it's going to be just interesting to see how they go forward with this. He's a controversial pick in so much that for the longest time he was kind of this very much bottom of the barrel. He was kind of like the Cleveland Browns of the WWE, and then he finally kind of turned it around recently. He has a bad guy stable. But another controversial aspect of it is that they're kind of running with this America does not like diversity, but now he's being portrayed as the bad guy in that. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, it's the WWE, and Vince McMahon has done way worse things, so many worse things. So we'll see. It looks like they're at least making him credible by putting the championship belt on him. So, and it looks like he's having fun with it too. And I think he put in the work. So congrats to him.
I want you guys to visit our website, twoNatesOnSports.com. Also like us on Facebook at 2NatesOnSports. Find us on YouTube, 2NatesOnSports. We have our channel up, as well as subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. Nathan, I will talk to you next week.
Talk to you then, man. Boom, boom, boom. Great to be in Houston.